Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Important business as we get in the episode. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. This is the beginning of Geeky Gentlemen History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions that Geeky Gentlemen have made to history but that have been ignored by a biased educational system, except not at all. I am your host, Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
I'm that Matt Kid, and I'm okay, I'm ready. I'm good. Let's go.
And I'm the historically aware Steve Baxi.
The historically aware Steve Baxi. That's new. What makes you different from last year's Steve Baxi?
Now I'm aware of last year's Steve Baxi, I guess. That's really the only difference.
And last year's Steve Baxi was not aware of himself, as we
I
were.
was not.
Oh,
And then every year from now on, there's just going to be an exponent at the end of the name, and I'm just going to be like, historically aware by the second power, over and over again.
oh, there we go. Okay, let's see if you can commit to this, ladies and gentlemen. Skip ahead to, 17 episodes or whatever in the playlist and find out. All right. So we're here for another dive into History Month, and because we're recording this, a little behind-the-scenes drama, really close after our Halloween special, I just decided to do a topic, and this is something that has been on my mind lately, so I wanted to get into it, and that's just this idea of what you leave out, which is going to be the title. So I'll elaborate on what I mean by that, which is history is about like constructing a narrative at the end of the day of what happened and telling the story of what happened. And what I've found really interesting in a lot of my historical reading over the last year is the number of details that I would argue are intentionally left out because they interrupt certain narratives. And life is always, when you really get into the nitty-gritty of it, life is always much more complicated than any neat narrative can structure. So I just find the idea of what you decide to leave out to be just really fucking interesting. I've been talking about it with Steve a lot lately. If you've been following me on the Geeks for Fun Discord, I've been posting my thoughts on all these little histories of the Soviet Union early era, from founding to the death of Stalin. And I just keep finding these details where I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why don't we talk about this? And I think one of the most jaw-dropping ones for me that I never heard anyone mention, especially back when I was in high school, and this kind of was the debate, and this was the really hot button issue, is Soviet Union, the first nation to legalize same-sex marriage. It kind of interrupts the narrative of it being this horribly oppressive state. Now, that in and of itself is pretty funny, because saying it that way interrupts the narrative of maybe that place wasn't as oppressive as, they made it out to be, because the other detail that's left out there is, and then Stalin banned it because reasons that we could get into, but it's just really fucking interesting when you find those glossed over details where, I guess maybe it's not the most important thing in the structure of your narrative, but it is certainly inconvenient to mention because it suddenly derails your narrative a little bit there. So I don't know, I find that whole concept of what is left out to be really fascinating. Yeah. So where do you guys stand on this idea of what is left out of history?
I mean, for me, I think it all comes down to like you talk about things that are left out of the narrative. Well, then my mind immediately goes to, well, we have to consider who is telling the narrative and who does the narrative benefit. I think about the way that people will leave out the more radical beliefs of figures like MLK, for example, because it conflicts with this narrative of peaceful civil rights, or same thing with Stonewall and the violence that happened there. And people leave these things out because it's then easy to pacify and say, well, look, the course of human history is a progression of steady advancements all made through peaceful interactions, when the reality is actually extremely different than that. So when I think about what is left out, my mind is always going to like, why is it being left out and who does it benefit for it to be left out? I gotta get on my conspiracy shit, you know?
How about you, Steve?
Yeah, one of my favorite books that I reference a lot when I'm working on other stuff is this history of the Haitian Revolution called Silencing the Past, and it's entirely about that concept of like what's left out from accounts of history because it doesn't fit into a certain kind of narrative. And it coins this phrase called archival power, which basically just means that what is and isn't considered part of an archive for a historical event represents a certain kind of power being exerted by the people putting that archive together. And you can only stitch narratives out of what's in the archive. But then you've got your own personal biases that start arguing about whether or not something actually counts as a historically significant relic or not, or ignoring the existence of those things or pretending like you didn't find them simply because it omits how you already perceive certain people. There's a really interesting story about how there was a troop of German soldiers in the Eastern Front who massacred like 500 Romani people. And at the time, they were like going through their things, and they claimed that they didn't find any dictionaries or books or anything written down. And so when they started going back and reporting back about Romani people to Germany, they said that the Romanis were all savages because they couldn't read or write. And of course, that's not true, but they basically assumed that because they didn't find any of those things, then therefore they did not exist, and therefore the people are like this.
Yeah, those are both really great examples, and just takes on it. I think the best one to go off of, just to really start, is kind of what Matt was talking about of, well, who benefits from the narrative? And it just reminds me of this really funny Norm Macdonald joke, where he's like, I was just reading this history book, and it says that the good guys have won every time. What are the chances? And I really like that this piggybacks onto that idea of, well, history is written by the victors. So it's like, it's really easy to pin these ideas on these groups of people, or pin these biased narratives on these groups of people when you've wiped them out, and you get to be the one that decides what they've done and who they're responsible to. And something I find in particular is when you find stuff where like there is no victor, it's just two wildly different or vastly separated peoples talking about the same event. So before I was going through all the Soviet stuff, I was going through some French history, because I just realized I didn't know shit about Napoleon or Charlemagne. I just knew the names. And so I was like reading up on Charlemagne, and he's like, all the royal families trace their lineage back to Charlemagne one way or another, which is pretty funny. Because they're a bunch of inbred fucking hicks, but anyway, they all trace their stuff back to Charlemagne, their ancestry back to Charlemagne, because he's like the great unifier of the Middle Ages of Europe, the fall of Rome, and then Charlemagne's like the next big point in European history. but the funny thing about Charlemagne is just how backward and just behind every other major empire he was at the time. So he's got one of the largest land empires, but because he's cobbled it together out of like the remains of all these conquered Roman territories, he's like surprised to learn that they're not even speaking Latin. Because they've been so far removed from Rome for a couple hundred years by that point, the language has devolved, and that's like the beginning of French, and the other Romance languages. So he realizes they're not even speaking Latin, but he still has these dealings with all these like other major empires. And part of like historical diplomacy of that time was the practice of gift giving, not just to like build up alliances and stuff, but just to kind of humble brag about how much better you were than the person you were giving a gift to, because it shows I can afford to just give you this that you couldn't even dream of. And so from the fucking caliphate of Iran, he gets an elephant, and just try to imagine you're some fucking guy in the French court, early French court, French Germanic court, and now it's your job to take care of a fucking elephant in that climate, an East Asian elephant, and just what the fuck you're gonna do with that? But like to try to spin it and make it look good, Charlemagne's historians record it down as the caliphate gave him his only elephant. I somehow doubt it. I don't think anyone gives away their only elephant, but it's really funny to look at these differences, because Charlemagne barely comes up in the historical records of these other kingdoms that we know he was dealing with, but anytime those kingdoms come up in his records, they make like such a big deal out of it, because of just the discrepancy between the like relative influence and importance of the kingdoms of those times. Really interesting.
Yeah, along those lines, it is sort of interesting how when you look at empires or like vast swaths of Europe, there's always this like unifying notion of the history of that place. You go all the way back to like the founding myth of ancient Rome, and there's always like these simple truncated accounts of this is where everything stems from, and this is where everything sort of goes forward, and this is how everything's defined. And all of the sort of complexities are left out because it doesn't serve the sort of more propagandistic purpose of uniting people behind some sort of national identity or some sort of sense of superiority. And that mentality also sort of becomes the backbone of colonial thinking too, where when you start colonizing other places, you do it with this idea that you're imposing your unified will on this one place that couldn't possibly have it because they're not from your part of the world. And that kind of gets into that sort of danger of leaving things out of historical records, but also why it probably happens is you're psychologically at that point predisposed to think that nothing of import really happens outside of your sphere of influence. And then when you get somewhere and you see other things that are happening, you're only filtering it through what your prejudices are about that place or about that identity. One of the things about like the history being written by the victor that's really interesting is that sometimes people will just sort of do it to themselves even when they get defeated. Tolstoy in War and Peace, if you read that book, every few chapters when you start getting into the various skirmishes between Russia and Napoleon, Tolstoy will just stop telling the story and just start explaining the history of that specific conflict to you. But he'll do it in a really sort of condescending tone, because what he's trying to achieve is saying that the way everyone is told this history has been completely wrong because everyone just wants to bow down to the genius of Napoleon, even when they were being defeated by Napoleon. So there's this one character in War and Peace who's basically homoerotically obsessed with the Russian Tsar. And then his counterpoint is a character who's similarly intellectually infatuated with Napoleon. but they're both Russian. And so after the first major defeat that you read in the book, Tolstoy spends all this time saying, like, here's all of the accounts of Russian history glazing Napoleon for how much of a genius he was to defeat us in this moment because we had no idea what we were doing. But if you actually were there, he just got lucky. He couldn't possibly have known any of this. Why are we so quick to pretend like he won because he was smarter?
It's an interesting point because there's a certain level of, I don't know if dignity is the right word, but like, if you're defeated by a genius who has defeated the rest of the world, you don't look as bad.
Right, yeah.
The guy got really lucky. Yeah. It's like, yeah, I mean, I got knocked out, but you should have seen the guy. He was like Mike Tyson level. Like, it was ridiculous. There was just no way. The fact that I even fought him is like kind of a big deal. Like, you haven't fought Mike Tyson. I fought basically Mike Tyson. Then you like show a picture of the guy and it's fucking me, and you're like, well, he looked a lot. That lighting's real bad in that photo.
He's really, really quick and really scrappy, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, speaking of Napoleon, so I was reading, I was listening to an audiobook. Have you ever read Jewish Space Lasers by Mike Rothschild?
No, that sounds
amazing.
That's a great title.
Yeah, so Jewish Space Lasers is a history of conspiracy theories centered around Jews and specifically the Rothschild family. Now, Mike Rothschild, who wrote it, no relation, but good luck explaining that to the conspiracy theorists. And he's just running cover for his own family. I don't fucking. But like he talks about, I love this story. He talks about the Rothschilds. Big Jewish family, tons of wealth, a lot of hands in a lot of different pies throughout Europe, throughout history. And he talks about this idea that was spread that Nathan Rothschild, back in the 19th century, was like personally there, just coincidentally happened to be there to see France get defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. And then he booked it back to London so that way he could take that information and make a ton of money on the stock exchange. And that's how their wealth went from like, yeah, they're doing all right, to like one of the most wealthy families in the history of Europe. And it's just a lie. It's just a complete fabrication that happened even a little bit. But it's one of those things where it's like a lie travels the world before the truth can zip up its fucking fly. And like, it doesn't matter how much information you put out there to try to correct the record. When you're talking about lies that are printed and spread at a time like the 1800s or any other time where the ability of the average person to quickly fact check something is basically non-existent. And so suddenly you have these lies that become a fabric of history. And like now we can look back and say like, yeah, that's just propaganda that was spread that didn't happen. But it has been so ingrained in the belief system of like conspiracy theorists, and it was so ingrained in the popular understanding of this family throughout Europe by a large portion of people that you kind of can't shake it, even though it's provably false. And I find stuff like that to be really interesting. I do recommend Jewish Space Lasers. It's a fun read.
As you were speaking about it, I just added it to my wish list on Amazon. So that's
it's so good. It's such a fun book. I mean, fun is probably not the right word, but you know what I mean.
No, I mean, I love shit like that.
Yeah.
To your point, though, something that I always find interesting in that context of how does information spread before something like social media, and how does social media change the way information is spread, is when you go back to like the 16, 17, 1800s, the definition and the concept of truth is really susceptible to corruption, because there's this really good book called Leviathan and the Air Pump that actually goes all into this. But essentially the sort of thrust of the book is how much of early science in that period was, whether or not it was true, it wasn't true and believable in a way that a mass of people could come to accept it. And that's why there's a lot of superstition around certain things. But essentially what you would do in like the 1600s is, if you proved something, or you figured something out, or you invented something, you didn't show it to the masses or the people. You'd get the audience with either a governor or a king or some form of royalty. You'd show them the experiment, and then they would spread the word, and people would just believe the person in authority as witnessing this thing, and it's necessarily true. And that seems on its face really problematic, because who's going to get an audience with the king? At what point is that authority figure going to have their own biases about whether or not they believe what you did? And then how much is going to be lost in that game of telephone from the people who did something to the person witnessing it to then the person trying to explain it to a mass of people? And so when stuff like that happens, when things like history or truth or notions of advancement are all being funneled through somebody that kind of has a self-preservational interest in what they're communicating to the rest of the people, you start getting these really clear incentives to either not tell the whole truth, or discredit something, or spread an alternative account of something, because it's in your best interest in some cases to do that.
I think a good example of that is for decades, if not centuries, of I guess like post-Enlightenment time period, or maybe even just post-Renaissance. The scientific movement, like university professors, blah blah blah, didn't believe that asteroids existed, because there'd be like these, peasant farmers or whatever that found rocks in their field that, just in the middle of a big ass crater after they saw a shooting star, and were like, this fell from the sky, and they'd be like, look, sky up there, no rocks. You're crazy. You're making shit up. You're drunk. Go home. And what it finally took was for a massive meteor shower to just fall on a whole town, and for everyone in the town, including like the learned individuals, to have clearly seen rocks fucking fall out of the sky. So it's just, there's this thing of belief, and another good example of that is I think they call them rogue waves, where just sailors for years and years were saying that they'd just be out on the ocean and a wave the size of a mountain would just come out of nowhere and capsize the ship. And they're just, no, you're drunk, you're crazy, that's not real, waves have to dictate these certain laws. And it took well into the 1900s for a weather device pointed one way just by happenstance recorded a rogue wave just coming out of nowhere, and then they're like, oh well shit, these are real. The people that were on the ocean for years and telling us that they were real, those can't be believed. But luckily we had this one piece of scientific equipment pointed at somewhere at just the right time, and now they're real. So, but I think that does go to something, again, going to the what you leave out of the like folk wisdom or the knowledge of the peasantry or whatever is just not accepted. And this is like going into today. I remember I think it was a TED talk I was listening to where guy was talking about how he did some missions in Africa to like help people learn how to farm, and they're like trying to show them, and the people there are just like, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. It's like, no, look, we plant the seeds, the tomatoes will grow, it'll be great, watch. People just walked away and didn't think anything of it. And then, the tomatoes start growing. They're like, see, the tomatoes are growing. I'm like, yep, they are. They're not ripe yet. We can't pluck them yet, but give it a couple days, they'll be ready to pick. Like, I'm sure they will. Suddenly, right before the tomatoes were ripe enough to pick, guess what happened? A bunch of fucking hippos came out from the river, saw the tomatoes, and ate them all up. It's like, told you it wasn't gonna work. It's like, no, the people here understand the fucking concept of farming, but they have megafauna, which doesn't exist on any other fucking continent. It's like, so.
Oh, that's good.
People won't listen to the voice of the people, the voice of the little man, the rabble, the masses don't get listened to. It has to be, quote unquote, the great men that discover or lead or move things forward, when for years it's the the peasantry telling people the exact same thing.
Well, that's what we
just-
always do, right? We always like attribute the great discoveries and the great moments to like single individual people, and then we just kind of use that as like a sifter as we go through time. MLK single-handedly ended black oppression in the United States, like fucking Steve Jobs single-handedly soldered that iPhone and ushered us into new technology. My favorite example, this is more of a media and press thing than a history thing, but my absolute favorite example is from the early 2000s when IGN was writing a story about Deus Ex, and one of the quotes in their article was, there's a tendency among the press to attribute the creation of a game to a single person, says War Inspector, creator of Thief and Deus Ex. It's the funniest shit. It's like, that's what we do. We look back at history and we continue to sift until we're just, it's the great men. It's like survivorship bias, but for the great people of history, until slowly all the people who kind of built to that are left out of the conversation. I think it's interesting the way that happens. And I don't know if it's a tool to make it more digestible, because I feel like that's kind of where it comes from, right? When you're like teaching, because you have to also have to think about like, how do we teach history to people? And so when you look at like how kids learn history in like public education, we start with like the digestible things of like Christopher Columbus discovered America, and George Washington, was our first president, and that's kind of the gist of it. And then as people get older, ideally what should happen is that we then dig deeper into those histories and find the complexity. But what's interesting is that sometimes people kind of reject that complexity, and they hold on to that simple view, and they hold on to this idea that history is shaped by a few great men, and maybe sometimes occasionally women. And that's, and then that becomes how we as a society start viewing history, and then that becomes how we as a society start viewing our path forward, because that's when you then get into this idea that, well, that's what we're missing, is like the great men who will come up and get us out of whatever situation it is, because we've taught ourselves not to view the path of history as the steady march of hundreds of thousands of individual people, but instead as like the specific actions of important people. And then it just kind of fucks up the way we view our present.
That's like almost directly related to the shit I'm going through right now. So like I said, I've been going through a lot of Soviet stuff, and there's this image of Stalin as like this power hungry mad dictator, and I'm not gonna go so far as to say no, actually he was a kooky fun communist grandpa, because he wasn't. There's elements of that are certainly true, but like it's a neater narrative to paint him that way than to get into the weeds of it. But like what you talked about with George Washington there just really reminded me, because kind of like the greatest what if of Soviet history is, what if Stalin had not outmaneuvered Trotsky, and Trotsky had become the leader after Lenin. And like that's a really interesting what if, but counterpoint, Trotsky like has all these credits that his supporters love to bring up about just how much he did for the early Soviet Union. He created the Red Army. He predicted all these policies that the Soviets would eventually have to follow, and like the party lagged behind him and all this other stuff. He was like so great, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like, yep, and yet he lost hard and was politically outmaneuvered. Is there maybe a reason why? Maybe he was an asshole. Like, could you, like, just to really, like, nail it home, who the fuck ran for president against George Washington? Yeah, no one knows.
Am I part of the problem? No. I'm not part of the problem.
I know the answer, by the way, because of not because I actually know who did it, but because I know how American history worked for a little bit there. It was whoever ran against became vice president, and I know that Washington's vice president was John Adams, and John Adams became
that's
second
right.
president. That's the only reason I know that, but like that's a really good parallel of like how much do people have to hate you? Do your colleagues in government, at the very least? Let's not even talk about the people. Trotsky's train derailed because of snow on the tracks, and he had to threaten to court-martial his men to plow the tracks, and even though they were only about a mile away from the nearest train station, no one came to help because they knew it was his train. How much do people have to fucking hate you to be the one that did all these great things? And yet you still couldn't muster the political support to defeat Stalin, who is portrayed as, you know, a fucking paper pusher bureaucrat in those days. Like, that's a really... Again, this is, to me, the what is left out. That doesn't mean that Stalin was, you know, innocent and great and the nicest guy ever. He was mean as shit. But, like, for that guy to maneuver himself into power versus the one who did all the hard work that Stalin later took credit for, how much of an asshole did you have to be?
I mean, that's just funny. That's just funny in general, because, like, when we think about, like, the great figures of history, I mean, you're absolutely right. What's left out is what makes them, like, human. Like, we don't think about these people as like human beings the way we think about each other and the way we think about our friends and our colleagues. We think about them just as like a collection of things that they did or didn't do. But no one ever talks about like, did this guy just like suck to be around? Like, did he just make shitty jokes a lot? Like, fucking who knows? Like, we don't... It's interesting the way these people get viewed as myths and icons before they get viewed as just like normal ass people who happen to be important, and that's kind of interesting to me. I don't know. I'm not really coming up with a good example off the top of my head. At least not one that's better than what you were already saying. But I think that's an interesting point.
And I mean, sometimes too, a lot of that mythologizing about a person doesn't happen by them, but it happens by other people, or it happens against their will, and you get an image painted of that person outside of how they would have wanted to represent themselves. I'm always thinking about Nietzsche and his relationship to his sister. And over the last like 3 or 4 years, there's been this weird flood of books from the right and the left about whether or not Nietzsche was left-wing or right-wing. And a lot of people keep arguing back and forth about it. And it's the dumbest, most boring debate I think you could have about that guy. But historically, a lot of terminology for Nazi philosophy came from Nietzsche, and it came from his unpublished book, The Will to Power. But if you know about him as a person, you know that he was not a German nationalist at all. He didn't think that Germany as a country made a whole lot of sense, nor did it trend towards a positive history. He didn't like anti-Semitism. He was wildly against basically everything that the Nazis were founded on. But his sister married a guy who went to a country so that they could basically do eugenics experiments on that place, and he called her out on it. Then later, during his last 11 years, when he went blind and had to be cared for the entire time and was basically mentally gone, his writing took off after he could no longer be there to appreciate it. And his sister took all of his stuff and opened an archive and started rearranging and writing in his notes and completed a version of The Will to Power that wasn't his. And she was a Nazi. And so she lived much past him, and she opened up his archive to people like the early Nazis and also Hitler. So that association between Nietzsche and the Nazis happened almost entirely against Nietzsche's will, because during his life, he didn't stand for any of that.
Yep. Which is funny, because, you know, that the idea of, well, was he left-wing or right-wing? Well, probably had more nuanced views on it than wanting to stick himself to one group, you know, which you would get if you'd read his fucking writing.
Right, yeah.
But for what it's worth, yeah, like hated socialism. I can tell you that much.
Well,
it's
kind
been
of.
pretty fun.
He kind of did, but he didn't hate socialism in the sense that he hated Marx's idea of socialism. He hated socialism in the sense of how it was practiced in Germany at the time, which was very right wing.
Yeah, fair. But it's just, like it's a very distinct way to look at it. Of like, well, is he left wing or right wing? Well, he wouldn't like to label himself as that because that would be, group identifying. It's not like in the philosophy to do that. But yeah, I don't know. I find all that shit really, really fascinating when we like get into the background information and the things of, again, just what you're not told that like interrupt the narrative. Just always fascinates me. So like another Stalin one that's I just put it in my notes that I wanted to talk about tonight was there's the perception that he was irrationally paranoid, and that's the reason for like all the purges and the loyalty tests and stuff. And I think it's more complicated than that, but to try to justify the irrational paranoia, so there's the Russian Duma before the revolution was the Tsar's attempt to create basically a Congress. And he, shuts it down and shit a bunch of times because he doesn't like it. But one of the times that it's going, the Bolsheviks actually do get a member into the Duma, and he gets elected, and he's incredibly popular and starts rising through the ranks. And then just suddenly, one day, he just resigns and, like, fucking leaves the country. And they're like, why do you do that? That's so weird. And then, come to find out, it's because he was actually just a police agent that the Okhrana, the secret police, had been paying to basically be a spy or an agent within the Bolshevik party. And literally the reason that Stalin went into exile in Siberia the last time before the revolution, and he was there for a number of years, was because he'd asked this guy if it was safe to go agitate at this particular rally, or if he should be, kind of hiding out. And the guy's like, no, you're safe, go for it. And that's when he gets arrested and sent into fucking exile. So to come back and find out that guy was a police spy, he was like our biggest, most popular dude, and he was a fucking spy. Yeah, I'd have some trust issues after that too, maybe. I don't know. These stories, again, like, I don't think that any of the things I've talked about or learned about, like, fully break and dismantle any of the narrative around Stalin, but it becomes incredibly inconvenient to that narrative. So it breaks the narrative in the sense that narrative clearly does not stand up to scrutiny, but it doesn't, like, negate it completely. It's not like you can take it and justify a complete 180 because you find these one or two instances. Because, again, people are more complex. People contain multitudes, right? You can be a racist but have, like, a fetish for black people. Those things, far from being mutually exclusive, are often deeply connected to one another. And so these contradictions don't necessarily completely break a narrative, but they do start to poke holes in it. And so the more you learn about a thing, the more you can say, well, I don't know about all that. Which is funny because, I go in to all this reading wanting a clearer picture, and arguably, to Matt's point earlier, I end up with less of a clear picture. Because now, instead of being ignorant of all this information, now I know it, and so now I feel like I don't know enough to confidently say anything. I do not have the confidence of an idiot that hasn't read anything that speaks. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also part of it, is within the confines of not academia, but like public schooling for history, and even private schooling, at early level education, let's call it that. There's not the time and the interest to express that level of detail in anything. That's all for like the more specialized, as you know more, you learn more, and like that's where you go get your degrees and stuff. That's when you're supposed to learn that information. But the problem is, so many people never get to that step or are interested in that step. So many people barely want to pay attention to anything in school. Something that I find remarkable, again, Stalin, because I've always had some kind of morbid curiosity about the man. I have a shirt that I wear that has it's a picture of Brandon Routh's Superman doing the hands on the hip pose, and I've superimposed the head with Stalin's, and above it says Man of Steel. And that's hilarious because it's a pun, because Stalin wasn't his real name. He changed it, and it roughly translates to Man of Steel. And I think that's hilarious, and I wear that shirt pretty often, and I've never had one person stop me and go, why the fuck do you have him on your shirt? Which, if I did it with Hitler, right, like, that would immediately send up red flags for people. People would, like, be scared. They would, like, immediately prejudge me on a lot of things. And maybe they're doing it for Stalin, and I'm just not giving people enough credit, but, like, the education level isn't there. People don't pay enough attention to even know who this guy was, much less any of the deeper picture of him. Much less to even recognize a picture of his face.
Odd,
right?
given that he and Hitler both have such distinct mustaches.
He does have. If we're just talking purely fashion, right? Stalin's mustache much superior to Hitler's toothbrush.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
oh, 100%.
absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
That was never a debate.
Oh yeah, no.
Kudos to Stalin for not ruining an entire brand of facial hair by picking something so distinct. But
I mean, if you
Michael Jordan had a Hitler mustache.
Oh man. If we're talking about history's greatest facial hair, I do feel like Castro's beard's got to be up there, though.
I don't know. Wilhelm the First, Kaiser Wilhelm the First's got like crazy mutton chops, but like shaved right in the middle. It's so good.
That'll be our topic for next week. Is just history's greatest facial hair.
Right, top 10.
Da Vinci, Marx, ZZ Top.
Marx has
Abraham
ZZ
Lincoln. ZZ Top right up there with the greats like Hulk Hogan. Great.
That's fair. That's fair. I'd throw that up there.
But yeah, to that point though, we don't have the time for people to go into the more nuanced, deeper conversations about these historical figures, these historical eras. But because like we can barely get people to pay enough attention to just be able to pass the test of who was X person, what did X person contribute. No, we can barely get that level. We don't have time for any like nuance of argument.
Well, and even if you
sorry, just one last thing. And then even if like a student independently did, them answering with nuance on a certain question could lead more likely to a fail if the teacher's just not read up on it, or a fucking meeting with their parents and the principal if it's a dark enough thing.
That reminds me of this. I have a serious point, but it reminds me of this meme I saw once where it's like a guy goes to a parent-teacher conference and he's like, "Your son keeps writing "Stop teaching bourgeois propaganda" on all his homework," and the dad's like, "Well, have you tried not teaching bourgeois propaganda?" That's so good.
I'm gonna save that in the back pocket.
But on a serious point, even if people wanted to be nuanced, though, the other problem you run into is just accessibility. A lot of academic histories, a lot of academic textbooks, a lot of these research projects, those books are really, really expensive. Like there is a book that came out recently on the history of Indian parallel cinema, and if you want a copy, it's $125. Just
Jesus
because,
Christ.
yeah, it's just because books that are published through university presses have extremely small print runs. No one really buys them. They just kind of sit in university libraries and get rented out. So if someone wants to buy a copy, it's super expensive. Or if you want to buy like a history journal or something or get a subscription to them, they're also like several $100s on a monthly basis or an annual basis to get the issues of every historical article being published. The people doing the research and the people writing the research and the people who have access to the information, they're always so sealed off in that academic bubble that the amount of that information that trickles out is really sparse because only so many people have access to that kind of stuff. And so you don't get the full picture of like a book or an argument or an essay. You get the little quote that got screen capped by one person and went viral or got echoed somewhere else. There was a thing the other day I was reading on Blue Sky about how Kim Kardashian said that she doesn't believe the moon landing happened. And her quote, like her yeah, her exact quote is something like, people will think I'm crazy, but go to TikTok. I'm like, first of all, why would you go to TikTok for any information on anything? But the tragedy is that a lot of people do. A lot of people's like sort of core media for consuming knowledge of any kind, whether it's like reviews or critical history or engagement on a topic or information on anything, is to just go to truncated TikTok videos instead of just like reading the Wikipedia or finding a book or going to the library. And especially now, even when you go to those other online sources, so much of that information is becoming more and more tainted by the AI slop that's being churned out. So all the nuanced arguments you would want to have about an historical period, it all starts to feel really, really insular. I mean, every time I want to like buy an interesting new biography that comes about with people I'm interested in, my best bet is just to wait until there's a used copy I can buy for like $30, as opposed to like the brand new university press release that's like $90 to $100.
It's so weird that like information is more available to people than it has ever been, and yet simultaneously the very method by which that information is available to us, it is being like obfuscated at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. It's bizarre that anyone would turn to social media for historical analysis or answers of any kind, given that you're more likely to get someone's fucking like conspiracy theory about how aliens did the pyramids or some shit.
So here's my conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And
About
then
the
I'll
aliens?
talk about a serious thing. So aliens did in fact build the pyramids, man. You got to understand this. It's just that they did so by following human plans and under human supervision because they came here to make friends now that they found a new sentient species and were terrible, and we enslaved them and forced them to build the pyramids, and then we let them go because we figured we wouldn't need anything else. And they're like, well, we're fucking never coming back. This was bullshit. And that's the real history of what happened.
That's good. It's not quite as good as your moon landing conspiracy theory, though. Where
What was my moon landing conspiracy?
Your moon landing conspiracy from years ago, it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard, where you're like, yes, Stanley Kubrick did fake the moon landing, but he's such a perfectionist they actually went to the moon to shoot it.
God damn it, that's so fucking funny.
I can't believe you didn't remember that.
I got too many ideas bouncing up here, Steve. I got so much brilliance. You think I can remember trifles like that?
If there ever comes a day where you die before me, I'm saying that at your funeral.
Okay, I'll take it. Put that shit on my headstone. I'll take it. So, but to your point, and like this is a funny example because yes, a lot of information on social media is like at best bias a lot of times, if not just straight up wrong and making shit up and like quasi based on racist conspiracy theories and stuff. But I'm gonna provide the the problem with this. But sometimes it's just not, and it's actually really good information. There's a channel I really like called Mini Minuteman with a guy named Milo Rossi, and he's a pretty recent grad. He graduated like in the pandemic era, and he just was annoyed by the constant conspiracy theory crap he was seeing, so he just started making little shorts and TikToks and stuff debunking how stupid a lot of the conspiracy theories were. It just would go into it for like a minute. And since then he's broadened down. He's doing more like not just debunking conspiracy theories, but like longer format wide topic videos. And they're quite good and quite informative, and like he's considering going back to school to get a PhD specifically in the debunking of pseudoscience. Or science communication and debunking of pseudoscience as like what he's considering doing a PhD in, because it's a worthwhile field. But he does a lot of really great videos where like he'll just find someone who cranks out all this conspiracy shit, and he's like, all right, but like it's more complicated than that, but you don't like it. It's so much easier to just Google something and get the AI response and say, well, that's good enough, and then go on to the next thing. But it's not good enough. Like, that's not how research is done. If you're going to criticize research, who is they? Why are they keeping these things from you? What benefit does it possibly give anyone to hide that the Earth is flat? What's the goal? What is the profit here? It's like just one of the core arguments, and it gets really, really funny, but it also is useful because it becomes insightful in its own manner. So I quite appreciate his stuff. And he's admitted like when he's made mistakes or like misrepresented something. Sometimes in his videos you get little asterisks of like, got this part slightly wrong, and there's a little correction there or whatever. But I just but to find that creator, that's not what the platform pushes, right? That's the only reason his stuff gets big is because it is tangentially connected to this other crap that gets so much bigger. And this is an interesting problem, is it's really hard to talk about what is left out without getting into space that starts to get really close to conspiracy theory and starting to touch on those ideas or those notions of things are being hidden from you. You're not being told the whole truth, man. They just want to keep you brain dead so you're a better sheep for the machine, man. That there's a very thin line between questioning a narrative that were presented that may be incorrect or maybe oversimplified, and getting into just questioning things to question things because for whatever reason it feels good to abandon or dunk on or just not be a part of what the in-group think is.
Ooh, that's such a good point. How like
yeah,
with like conspiracy. So like I have a coworker who is very very much enlightened centrist, and he's got a penchant for conspiracy theories, and he loves conspiracy theories. But as soon as I suggest like, what is a conspiracy theory sounding thing, but is like pretty true, is shit like what the American government purposefully did to like Black American neighborhoods between redlining and then later the war on drugs and the flooding of the streets with illicit drugs, so that way they could be over policed and then thrown into jail, or the idea that the American government had something to do with the death of MLK, that they were infiltrating Black liberation movements from very early on. And when you say all those things, it kind of doesn't sound substantively different from whatever conspiracy shit that he's on. And so it's the idea of dunking on conspiracy theorists, kind of exactly like you were saying, becomes difficult when our actual reality is filled with very real conspiracies that do happen. It's just, but they're not this whole... Okay, so like a great example is like the Pizzagate QAnon thing. Like, yeah, you guys are right. There is a ring of elite rich pedophiles, but you're wrong about who the pedophiles are. And it's like, how do you approach that?
What?
No, Matt, there was a basement to that fucking pizza place.
One of the things about that, though, that I do think is also interesting is you're absolutely right that these things sound like a conspiracy, but there still has to be, on some level, a recognition that the way a conspiracy is spread versus how historical analysis is done are two divergent things. And even though the answers can both sound similar, the basis for one actually has something to stand on versus the other one that doesn't. One of the things that people harp on the right a lot is how academia is all like left-wing and communists and professors indoctrinating kids into Marx and stuff. But
fucking goddamn it, I wish.
Right, that's the thing.
Right.
It's like, if you've spent any amount of time in like a history department or a philosophy department, that is not true. A lot of academics are actually pretty conservative, and academia as a whole is a very sort of conservative situation to be in. The thing about it, though, at the end of the day, and there's a film historian I follow that made this point before, but I also really like it. But the thing about the difference is that the conservatives in academia are still doing the historical material analysis. They're actually gathering facts. They're going to archives. They're doing the legwork. And so the academics that are right-wing in the academy that you don't hear from, the reason you don't hear from them is because their baseline of research is a lot more intense than the right-wing side of the spear that's all just conspiracy theories. And even the left-wing conspiracy people and the left-wing academics have this same sort of disconnect. There's a lot of people that are like insane left-wing conspiracy theorists about the trajectory of the United States and the way that the US government infiltrated communist organizations and stuff like that. And some of it's true and some of it's not. But if you talk to like left-leaning professors and stuff, they sound pretty conservative because at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of research there. There has to be some sort of evidence. You actually have to do the legwork. You need interviews. You need books. You need archival accounts. And a lot of people that just peddle conspiracy theories are allergic to that kind of methodical research.
Because it's not fun.
Exactly.
Like, that's kind of the wider
it's
thing.
fun, but yes.
It's hard,
I think it's
Steve.
fun.
Yeah.
It's
because
work.
it's not fun for them. It's more fun to just like find some random thing. Fucking what was it? The video Milo Rossi posted that just cracked me up was this guy's driving. Dude's reacting to a video of a guy driving down the road and seeing a pyramid-shaped hill carved into the wall, carved into the rock face in fucking Nebraska or whatever. And the dude just pauses the video and goes, "Man, we have fucking pyramids in America. Man, I'm not learning shit on at school. Everything I learned that was worth knowing, I learned on TikTok." It's like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Oh man.
And like, so what he does is like, all right, so where's the hill? Yep, no, that's a rock quarry. That's what that was. You found a rock quarry. They blasted a cliff face at a diagonal angle. It kind of looks like a pyramid. That's what you found. Like, it's not there was not a fucking ancient pyramid uncovered in Nebraska, right? But that's that answer, that research, that Google Map level of debunking. That's just not fun. It's more fun to think that there's this, entire network of history and shit that's being hidden from you because, I don't know, like, wouldn't it be just, how much money do you think Egypt makes from people going to see those fucking pyramids? Like, not just like on a yearly basis, like ever. They're the oldest structures around. Like some of the oldest human structures around. The pyramids went up when the fucking mammoths were still alive. And how much money do you think, like, collectively Egypt has made of people just wanting to go see those fucking things and then having to spend money in Egypt for the privilege of doing so? Like, in the 10,000 year history of the human race, how much money do you think Egypt has gained from the pyramids? I'm pretty sure that if we had pyramids in America, we'd be fucking, those would be huge tourist traps, man. They're a big deal in Mexico. People really like them. People go to see the Aztec and the Mayan pyramids. Why the fuck wouldn't we show you the pyramids in Nebraska? This is the Nebraska Pyramid Formation. The Blackfoot tribe or whatever built these thousands of years ago. Like, it would be a big fucking deal.
Dude, have you ever like?
But it's more fun to believe that things are hidden from you. And that's but it is fun when you legitimately find shit that's been hidden because it's inconvenient to talk about. That shit's fun. It's also a good feeling.
There's like a satisfaction that I feel like should come with like getting that puzzle piece that makes it like click into place for you. Like, have you ever like have you ever corrected someone on their conspiracy nonsense and they look like mad about it? Like they're pissed. Because they don't actually care. They don't actually. So like, okay, the same guy at my work, he was talking to.
Name him.
His name is Joel. So I was talking. I'm not gonna say his last name. It starts with a D. Anyway, so Joel D and I were talking, and he was asking like, why is it that like, but it is weird that like Jewish people have so much money and like control over like stuff, and I'm just saying it's weird. So then I had thankfully just read that book, and I was like, okay, well, like, Joel, do you want to know the answer? It's because like it goes back to the Middle Ages where like Christians weren't allowed to practice usury. So like in the 1300s, castles and kings would have like a court Jew whose whole job was to do the money. And so you had whole collectives of Jewish people who that was like all they were allowed to do because they were like second-class citizens in the Holy Roman Empire. But the thing that they could fucking do was money lending. And so they got really fucking good at it. And they, as a culture, started valuing education and community. And they fostered that. And then when they were able to then disperse throughout more of Europe, that acumen is what allowed them to do so well. It's like, no, these things all have genuine, real answers, but you don't fucking want the real answers because I can tell that your eyes are glazing over. And I'm just like, so you don't actually give a shit, do you?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is like, even beyond the fun argument, a lot of conspiracy theories are all just about validating biases or preconceived notions. They exist because you have a certain disposition or you have a certain core belief, and the explanation you're given is giving voice to these things that you need validated. Like right now, when you look at all of these young guys on the internet that then go down the right-wing pipeline, all of it is just conspiracy theories that are peddled at these notions of insecure men. And the reason they take off and the reason people believe in them so vehemently in their core is because it gives them a reason to justify the position that they're in without taking any sort of responsibility. So when you poke holes in their conspiracy theory or you correct them on things, it's like you're attacking their identity because that's where their identity and their validation is coming from.
This is a thing that I bring up all the time because people don't actually like to debate their ideas. The reason that you see in like workplaces and bars or whatever of like no sports or no religion or politics, this is a sports bar, we're not here to debate religion or talk politics, is because these beliefs that people identify with, they believe them strongly, but they don't actually have the mental training most of the time to be able to talk about them and question them. And so there's this really interesting response that's like scientifically been recorded of when people are questioned on these fundamentally held beliefs, the reason that they push back and the reason that they get so heated is because it is activating the same part of their brain that's responsible for fight or flight. When you question someone's religion, when you question someone on politics, not that you shouldn't do it, but it is actually a physically ingrained response that it is like you have physically attacked them. If they have not, like, trained that reaction out of themselves, which is what, like, I didn't realize it at the time. That's, like, what a lot of undergrad was for me. Like, kind of teaching you how to... Part of critical thinking is teaching you how to not have an immediate emotional response to your ideas being questioned. Which is why a lot of people flunk out of, undergrad and stuff, is because they aren't ready for that. And so when you see people flunk out, it's like, oh, the teachers are just out to get me, or whatever tends to be a response. And this might go back a little bit and be partially responsible for why, conservatives that don't like to think and don't like to question things just assume that there's quote-unquote left-wing bias in academic circles.
There's a movie in the 90s to kind of get at your point about debating called Little Buddha, which is a really, really good movie. It's directed by Bernardo Bertolucci. And it's based on a book, and there's a scene that got cut from the movie that I believe is also in the book that's really, really interesting, where two people, because it's all set in a Buddhist monastery and it's all about monks and stuff, but there's these two people who are having this argument, and one of the main characters goes in, and he's a Western guy, and he's watching them argue like really intensely for a while, and he asks someone like, what happens when one of them wins? And he's like, and they he didn't understand the question. He's like, well, then the argument's over. Then they've solved the problem. The reason they're arguing is because they're trying to figure this out, not because someone has to win.
Yeah. I don't know. It's wild to think about these things. But yeah, so there's that thin line between asking deeper questions about the narratives we're fed and going too far and maybe not asking the right kinds of deeper questions or enough deep questions, and kind of going with whatever your personal preference or bias is. Like, I think that's something you see a lot of. People question it just enough until it confirms their own preconceived notions. Mm-hmm. And then that's good enough for them. That's the explanation that they're walking away with. And again, it takes a certain level of discipline to kind of remove yourself from that. Because again, with my my historical reading, I was bothered by the first thing I read on Stalin being not only critical of Stalin. I was ready for that. I'd heard the 20 million people sent to concentration camps, 30 million people killed and intentionally starved to death. And so the first thing I read didn't parrot those exact numbers, but the argument the dude made, like the basic thesis of his book at one point, basically came down to there's nothing in communist ideology that demands the level of paranoia and sacrifice and murder and tyranny that Stalin brought, but something about that ideology let Stalin get away with it because people were always willing to believe him when he said it was true, that he was doing it for communism. And I'm like, no, I don't buy that because I know leftists. That's not, that kind of unity doesn't exist. You're wrong. So after reading, or listening, whatever, to a 60-hour, 2-volume fucking audiobook on Stalin by one guy, I was like, all right, well, let's find something from a leftist perspective so I hopefully can get some more stuff. And the next thing I found was as far left as you could possibly get, where the guy's like, Stalin did nothing wrong, unironically, like trying to justify or give context. And a lot of it is really interesting and useful context. It doesn't mean I 100% agree with his premise, though. I would feel uncomfortable doing that. So then I would find, like, another, like, I'm fucking like 13 books deep at this point into this era of history that all just started with, and I really don't know that much about Stalin that I didn't learn in like high school. Let's do a deeper dive on this. And I'm impressed by how like above my peers I was for being insightful about it, but again, I come to that now with a more like with a much stronger background. I'm at the point now where I'm like listening to these books. I'm like, no, actually, that's wrong. Or this book was published back in this era, and that's since been disproven. So, you know, it doesn't negate the whole book to find one wrong thing in it. People are human. People make mistakes. People don't have the full context, and they write the best of what they know. But then there's also like political biases and things being juggled. I've just come to the conclusion that the entire era, or the entire history of the Soviet Union is so politically controversial that literally if someone tells me that they read a book on Soviet history so they know what they're talking about, I'm going to say a book or multiple, because you can't actually know anything until you read at least two on any one couple years or specific era or specific person, because the amounts of like political bias that exists around this are just so extreme that the super left communist socialist thinkers will like excuse away so much and are willing to, whereas the super right-wing capitalist thinkers just do not want to give a fucking inch for just, no, they're all fucking evil. I swear, Lenin rubbed his hands together like an evil little bastard when he heard about this thing. It's like, it's just, no, it's more complicated. It's immeasurably more complicated than either side wants to give, not to sound like a fucking dirty centrist here. But again, I know leftists. They don't just go along with this shit, man. You remember when they fucking like kicked a guy out of the Democratic Party because he took one inappropriate picture with a sleeping female soldier? Like, they threw out his whole work for like one minor transgression, which, you know, not saying it's undeserved, but like, they're really fucking at each other's throats constantly. Most leftists hate leftists. Most leftists are just looking for a reason to fucking hate another leftist.
Damn leftists, they ruined leftism.
You're not wrong.
Oh man!
But it's so interesting though, because then you get to see and I don't want to make the whole thing about that, but it's kind of interesting how you then see like the right-wing people who are the conspiracy theorists. They kind of position themselves as the group who is questioning the narrative, and it's like, you're spreading bullshit.
It's like when they say like the right wingers are the new punk rock, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's the same sort of notion.
Yeah, it's like you are just showing your whole ass and dick and balls when you say that, because like you clearly do not know anything about that. Like, fucking, you go to Gilman Street, you go to the sign that says no homophobia, no racism, no sexism, you know, and it has been there since the fucking like 80s and shit, and you tell me that you're the new I'm sorry. I actually know shit about the history and culture of punk rock, unlike you motherfuckers who are all like, oh, Ben Shapiro's like, well, actually, I think we're the new punk rock and the leftists are bad, okay, is the thing. And it's just like, shut the fuck up. Ugh. Hate it.
It's not about just standing out from the norm. It's about questioning the actual morals of the norm, guys.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing that I feel like, because we always talk about how the right wing is a very united front and the left wing is not, especially in modern U.S. politics. But there is probably something to that notion of, you've got dozens of different conspiracy theorists on the right who all believe conspiracy theories that are all contradictory conspiracy theories. But at the end of the day, when the substance of the conspiracy isn't what's important, but finding a way to justify some sort of preconceived notion or prejudice is the baseline, of course you've got a lot of unity. If you've got a group of 5 million racists who all unite on racism, it doesn't really matter if their race science isn't consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which is why I find, like, again, humor is so good at this. Stephen Colbert, I think, was, like, the best at this ever. Back when he was doing, like, The Daily Show and Colbert Report. Where he would just, like, play that character of, like, the right-wing pundit or what have you. And he would just, like, show the pitfalls of the logic by just making shit up, and people that didn't know who he was and didn't know what he did, he would just make shit up to, and they'd go, yep, 100% that. That's exactly what it's all about. And then he would just lead them to this place where then they're like, oh, what? Well, wait. It was always perfect, and it was remarkable how easy he did it.
Yeah.
Jon Stewart does it as well. There's other people that have, like, tried to like go on that, but I think Colbert just did it better than anyone else. And it's kind of funny that he decided to quit from that because he felt he had too much morals because he felt it was contributing too much to the divisions of the country instead of just continuing to do it for an entire career and just make billions of dollars doing it. And now he got fired.
Yeah, now he's quit doing that, and the country's more divided than it's been in a long time. So thanks, Steven.
Yeah, probably all his fault.
It's his fault.
Got fired for trying to be more, not necessarily centrist, but try not to just poke fun at that mindset and the people what that leads into for people. This is an entirely different topic, so somebody write it down, because we're not going to talk about it. I'm just going to put it down here for future Ian, because that guy's forgetful as fuck. We just need to do an entire episode of just, does conservatism have any value?
Oh, dude.
That'd be a fun one.
Oh, that would be fun.
Oh. Like, arguably
no,
the most
episode
useless
over.
philosophy.
God.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you think we've hit a good place where, like, we're aware of the pitfalls of questioning the narrative too hard, but we're also aware of, like, the things you leave out of a narrative are quite important and muddy the waters? Is that the place we've reached in this? Is there anything else worth continuing to talk about, continuing to go into?
I'll just end on my often quoted note of just read books, people. Go outside, read books, go to your library, do things that are not social media deep dives.
Dude, I need, like, it's wild how I regularly think to myself, like, man, I need to read more books. I really only read, like, a handful of books a year. But then I'm like, that is still so many more books than the average American.
Exponentially more than most people.
And I'm like, and most of those are even nonfiction. So I'm just like, oh my God. I agree. Read books. There's value and fun to be had in educating yourself. And, like, I've learned a lot from, YouTube video essays, deep dives, as long as you do the proper vetting to make sure you're not listening to some shit. But at the same time, like, you can't make that your only source of information. You just can't. Like, it's not healthy for your brain or your body of knowledge.
Like, it's worthwhile. It's a good primer. Like, I'd say this in, like, the least insulting way. The video essays, I feel, have kind of taken the place of what, like, Discovery Channel and History Channel documentaries used to be. Used to being a very, very primary word there, because the level of research and academic rigor that those had was never great, but it was about on par with what you've seen in a lot of, like, video essayists today, where, they don't, like, 100% make everything up, but they are, they're starting with the conclusion and gathering evidence from it, which is what I think a lot of those documentaries used to do and still do to this day, but now it's just gotten fucking ridiculous. That's what I would say most of like the top tier video essayists are, is they're starting with the conclusion and they're bringing all their evidence in that supports that conclusion. I don't think I've seen many video essayists go off on the now counter arguments to this might be. That's where you start to get to that high tier. Now we're entering academia.
That's the thing that people, I feel like, don't really understand is like as good as YouTube and video essays can be if they're properly done,
Right.
there's no editors for that shit. There's no academic standards. There's no peer review. I mean, the reason history books, part of why they cost so much, but also part of why they take so long to publish is you can't just say shit. You can't just like read 3 things and then compile them until someone else comes in and says, hey, this is actually wrong. Or did you read this also? Or did you cross-reference this? Or actually you mistranslated that. Trying to like get anything published for any reason is such a painstaking process of going back and forth to the point where like your works cited page has often got more words than your actual argument.
Yeah, that was one of the funny things I found about what Fur was doing, because Fur is the guy I was talking about earlier. He was like, no, Stalin never did anything wrong. Is he like his process, which is at the very least, he's proven that a lot of the academia surrounding these, what I guess you'd call popular histories, is just really bad. If he's proven nothing else, he's proven that, because that's all he does is like, so I went to his works cited, I looked at every citation in this book, and here's why it is lying or misrepresenting or it's citing the wrong thing. Because, like, what he found was a lot of these are kind of just lead to a lattice of secondary sources that all cite each other instead of going back to the primary source. So he's like, all right, so there's where this is. This thing's not the primary source on this, so let's go trace that to its primary source. Oh, look at that. That's not what it fucking says. Weird. And so it's just, again, it doesn't prove his conclusion 100%, but it definitely shows that the amount of research being done for these popular histories is not as good as it should be. And he's got like a whole thing of like what he called the anti-Stalin paradigm, where because Stalin is just so popularly seen as a monster and this idea was created in the shadow of the Cold War, you can't question that idea anymore. It's just like, if you question it at all, then you are like basically banned from this kind of academia, and that's a problem because a lot of the research on these is really bad. And yeah, like the first book I read, or the book I read from him is a response to a book called Bloodlands. It's called Blood Lies. And Bloodlands opens with this story of like a Ukrainian person who knew he was going to starve to death, but he wanted to die with dignity, so he dug his own grave. And then he came back on the day that he was going to starve to death to that grave and found that it was filled in with other people and covered over. So he dug his own grave again. And then he laid down in it and died, apparently. And it's like, okay, so a starving person doesn't have the energy to dig their own grave once, much less twice. Was just like the beginning claim, like, yeah, I mean, the human body is capable of a lot of things, but you're not wrong. And then he goes on, it's like, so the source that he cited for this is not really a historical source. It's like a collection of stories surrounding survivors of the Ukrainian famine. The Ukrainian fandom. That's a toxic. It's a story of survivors. But what's more importantly is to open his book like this, yeah, he gets the name of the supposed guy wrong. And ultimately, there's no, like, grave marker or place to go back this up. And, you know, not for nothing, this reeks more of fable than of actual event. So to open your book with something that you can just immediately, like, deconstruct that quickly by looking at where it's sourced from. And again, I think the thing that stood out to me as just, this was really poorly done, there's no excuse for getting the fucking name wrong. If you got the name wrong on a fucking academic paper like that, and your professor, their student assistant more likely, had done any of the research on your citations, you'd get an F. It's just, that's bad. That's bad academia. But all this to say, yeah, there's a lot going on with this topic. I wanted to wrap up, and then I just went on another fucking 3-minute rant there. So here we are. I think we're done. I think I'm just gonna say we're done. We're done. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. We don't do that anymore because it got too complicated at the end of the episode. We'll be back next week with a review topic. So see you then. Until then, I'm the philosopher.
I am still deciding what to change my sign off to because I'm done. I'm done being the erotica lover. Okay, you can't make me.
Are you saying that you are not the history erotica lover? You don't love erotic histories?
I do like when the Greeks write gay shit.
That's fair. That's up there.
That's really my biggest problem with Troy is it's not gay enough.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, Aristotle said that the highest form of love is between man and boy. So.
Yeah, that's the thing that
I'm not gonna co-sign that, but yeah.
I always see. I fucking love Troy, right? I always see that brought up of like, oh, well, this fucking movie they changed him to cousins. I'm like, yeah, because representing the romance as it is in the Iliad would work, where Achilles is like 19 and Pericles is like 80. Yeah, go for it. let me know how that will look on film.
Good times.
Steve, sign off.
All right. If Matt doesn't want to be it, then I'll be the history erotica lover.
Oh, damn.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.
Cool. Good times.